The family of Babita Deokaran says closure remains out of reach until those who planned her killing are arrested and punished for her assassination. Babita Deokaran, a whistleblower who exposed corruption at Tembisa Hospital, was gunned down outside her Johannesburg home in August of 2021. While the people who carried out the shooting have been jailed, her family says they're still suffering because the triggerman hasn't, or rather the mastermind behind her assassination hasn't been identified.
4 years has gone by now, and our family are still at great pain, and we are still hurting, and it is difficult for us to even think of closure besides finding closure, knowing that the masterminds are still out there at large, and no one has been brought to book yet. Justice has not been served. It has been a very painful 4 years for the Deokaran family.
Now, tomorrow will be 4 years exactly since Babita Deokaran was gunned down after dropping her daughter off at school. News 24 investigative journalist Jeff Wicks has been tracking the story since the very beginning. He's also the author of The Shadow State, a book that traces the trail behind the whistleblower's murder and the corruption she sought to expose. Jeff, it's great to have you in studio. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you for having me, Michelle.
And it sounds strange to say, but congratulations on a book that I could not put down, and similar colleagues in the industry have said the very same thing. It's difficult, I imagine, to celebrate the completion of a book like this.
No, certainly. I mean, it's such serious subject matter, and you know, when I was writing the book, what I was trying to achieve was really to produce a tribute to Babita's memory, but also really shine a light on what she'd found, because it's important, I think, to her family and I think to the South African public in general that her legacy is not forgotten. And what she found at Tembisa Hospital is exposed to the fullest extent possible. And now when we approach the milestone of the anniversary of her death, we can take stock of the situation, and we see that not much has changed in the time that's moved past us.
Yeah. I want to get to, because you've done such wide-ranging investigative work, detailing the scale of corruption at Tembisa Hospital, this spider's web that's infiltrated Tembisa Hospital specifically. Before we get to that, I want to just say, Jeff, that the book is written with so much humanity and compassion for Babita Deokaran and for her family. In fact, I found it very, very difficult to get through the first few chapters of the book, because it is really written with a lot of heart and care. How you describe her final moments when her brother arrived on the scene, and he told you, and I think he told some other people as well, journalists who covered the story, that when he arrived and she was in the ambulance, she turned her head to him, and he just was so grateful for that acknowledgement that she knew that he was there.
And I mean, when you understand the nature of the Deokaran family as a family unit, it makes sense. I mean, these are salt of the earth people, but she came from a very large family and an extremely tight-knit family. So it was of no surprise to me, at least, that in the moments after she was attacked, her siblings were amongst the first people at the scene. And I think, as you mentioned earlier, we've done a lot of investigative work trying to trace her final footsteps and understand exactly what she was working on before she was assassinated and why she was assassinated. But what was lost in a lot of our reporting was the humanity of Babita Deokaran, and understanding that, you know, for the context of our investigation, she was a dedicated and ethical civil servant, but she was a single mom. She was a sister and an aunt, and really, the loss is felt by her family the most. And in as much as that tragedy besets them, what her death does is really make us understand the chilling effect and the manner in which whistleblowers, or anyone who acts against corruption really, is targeted. And we've seen that in an upsurge in a spate of targeted assassinations.
Yeah, and the thing about it is, reading the chapter about her making her final journey home to Durban, the 7-hour journey to Durban, driving in the car with her remains, her brother's hand on the coffin, making that final trek. You know, these are all the moments that I think about when I think about the beginnings of The Shadow State. But I doubt, you know, and just given the scale of your investigation into the criminal networks that operated at, and that continue to operate most likely at Tembisa Hospital, I doubt that these are things that those at the head of these criminal enterprises give a second thought. whether someone was a mother?
I think, Michelle, it takes a special kind of psychopath to steal from a hospital, and even more of a psychopath to steal from a hospital which really accommodates some of the most impoverished people in Gauteng, and a hospital which is perennially overcrowded, understaffed and under-resourced, that money was taken away from its true destination, which was the service of the patients of Tembisa Hospital, the desperately sick and dying, and diverted into the pockets of profiteers, people who made vast sums of money that you and I would never be able to even comprehend, hundreds of millions of rands in the space of months. And that is the scale at which extraction was occurring at Tembisa Hospital. Babita had seen the first shades of that when she first reported what she'd found. She'd only stumbled across relatively anomalous payment patterns. At the very least, the amount that Tembisa Hospital was spending was massive, 850 million rand in a 4-month span. And her calls for an investigation obviously went unheeded. And she tried to freeze 100 million rands worth of outgoing payments before her death. And lo and behold, after she was killed, those payments were released.
It's bizarre, isn't it? Because that single facility, Tembisa Hospital, was eating up the lion's share of the provincial budget. And we know that Chrisani Baragwanath is probably the biggest hospital complex on the continent.
Yes, and that's what Babita found. She examined the number of purchase orders that were being pushed through by hospitals. And of course, hospitals need medical goods and services to sustain themselves and to run. So spending money is not an issue, but spending money at the rate that Tembisa was significant. If my memory serves me correctly, in her initial report, she set out how the Tembisa Hospital was spending more than all of the following largest 9 facilities in the health network combined, 3 times over. So that's the scale at which these transactions were being executed at Tembisa. And now, obviously, through our investigation and the investigation of the SIU, we have a good sense of where that money went.
So, I mean, how would it be possible to operate, just in terms of what your investigation has revealed, to operate such a network of corruption on this kind of industrial scale, where there are meant to be checks and balances, and there are, right? There are various checks that these tender processes go through before payment can be made.
Of course. I mean, there's rigorous protocols for public spending, but the modus operandi here was executed with precision. All of the transactions that went to these tenderpreneurs were valued at under 500,000 rand, which meant they could use a 3-quote system. But what our investigation for News 24 and subsequently for the book revealed was that these individuals had captured the entire value chain. From the point that the order was originated within the hospital, its move through all the strictures and rigors of the procurement process up until the point that it was paid. And, you know, something that bears that out is just the frequency of these orders.
Right.
You know, we would see one company having 4 purchase orders approved on the same day. And I mean, in terms of public spending, that's unheard of. And they were really efficient at Tembisa Hospital, but obviously for nefarious ends.
And I think for our viewers, the 500,000 rand cap on tenders, because then you don't have to put it out to 3 separate quotations. I think that was something that stuck in many of our minds during COVID-19 because of the PPE corruption that happened during that time. And you speak quite extensively about corruption at Tembisa Hospital during the COVID years as well.
Yes, I mean, we must remember, I tend to forget where we were 4 years ago. We were in the grip of the COVID-19 pandemic, and it was at a time where our health facilities were strained immensely, and when money needed to be used appropriately for the good of people who were going to those hospitals and dying. And that didn't happen at Tembisa Hospital. We know from the records we found on Babita's laptop that at that point, they processed a payment of 500,000 rand for a consignment of skinny jeans. It's the one purchase order that everyone talks about.
Yeah.
And it's just so simply outrageous that it makes you think that, well, there was no actual need. There were no skinny jeans actually purchased. It was just creating a paper trail to allow a purchase order to be issued and funds to be released. And that's the suspicion about thousands upon thousands of transactions that were moved out of Tembisa Hospital, that there's no evidence that any medical goods or services were actually delivered. And the amount of stock that they were supposedly buying, be it ventilators or bandages, were so contrived in an attempt to get the value of that up to the 500,000 rand point.
Yeah.
Anything beyond that triggers a rigorous public tender process. Below that, 3 quotes can be compared and we take the cheapest.
Yeah.
But when the system is gamed and the 3 companies that are providing these quotes are all controlled by the same person, the outcome is engineered. It's not only what we see in Tembisa Hospital, we've seen it at Eskom, we've seen it at other state
In fact,
facilities.
you call it state capture 2.0.
It is the legacy of state capture, and it endures, because state capture during the Gupta era was easy to define. It was clear villains, and they targeted large, high-value SOE contracts. This is the real capture that we live with today, and that we'll live with tomorrow and the day after that, is money that's extracted in small amounts, but effectively, through libraries and clinics and social development agencies. This is what we need to try and stop.
It's just chilling, and my head is actually still spinning from the network that you outline in the book of how this corruption is able to take place, and actually the very few people that are banking, that are making money, that are banking these illicit funds to fund their high lives of mansions and luxury vehicles, and I think I'm going to leave it to our viewers. I think we don't have enough time to actually go into that, but it really is such a stunning description of and chilling, stomach churning description of how this kind of corruption takes place. In the lead up, there are certain characters that sort of stand out in Babita Deokaran's assassination, right? Lerato Madio is one of them, the chief financial officer at the time. So she was reporting to Babita Deokaran. Babita would have been reporting to her. She was central at the time because of a number of reasons, Jeff. Tell us about that and where she is now. Has she been investigated? Has she ever been questioned?
So Lerato Madio was the first person to formally receive Babita's concerns, 19 days before she was murdered. She was the one who took the report that set out her concerns about Tembisa Hospital. Several days after that, Babita was obviously worried about the foes that she was taking on, and she sent a WhatsApp message to Madio to say, you know, our lives could be in danger. And Madio responded by saying, no, she's asked the HOD for an urgent investigation. That was in fact a lie. Now, what happened with Madio was that she was charged with misconduct, 13 counts of misconduct, nothing to do with ignoring the report. It was simply for failing in her fiduciary duty linked to 13 specific transactions of thousands. Considering that it's a relatively small allotment of evidence, it still took the Gauteng Department of Health and the Gauteng Premier's office 2 years to conduct her disciplinary hearing, and it ended with her being allowed to resign and disappear into the ether. She's never been questioned by the police. She's faced no sanction as it regards her work at the Gauteng Department of Health. And again, it's an insult to Babita Deokaran's memory.
I've got some screen grabs on my phone because I was taking notes while I was reading last night, but it just wasn't good enough. I want to talk about the police investigation and what started as a police investigation, but as our viewers and your soon readers will discover, eventually got handed over to the Hawks, right? So, I mean, an obvious thing, if we've watched any kind of like CSI program, is when there's a murder and there's a cell phone on the scene or a laptop, is that it's seized and it's copied and we glean whatever we can, and particularly in a case like Babita Deokaran, where she was the one sending these emails, looking at these dodgy companies, some of which didn't exist. So your book talks about the fact that her phone and her laptop had not been processed at all.
Yes, they were never forensically examined. They were seized on the day of her murder, and then they sat in an evidence store for about 7 months. And I mean,
usually, what happens when if a laptop and phone is seized on the day, what happens then?
It's taken by the detectives, a proper chain of custody is maintained, and then it's moved to the SAPS's cyber forensic division where it's mirrored, basically copied in its entirety, and then with that copy it can be examined and, you know, ferret out evidence from that phone or from that laptop. In this case, that was never done. And, you know, this is not a revelation in the book that is new. News 24 reported this in September of 2023, and at the time we confronted the Hawks about this. They obviously denied that they never examined the laptop, but what's fatal for them is that after our story started coming out and we started to reveal details of what we'd found on the laptop, they had to ask the family for those laptops back. Our own forensic analyst told us that those devices were never imaged, and the Hawks will deny it boldly. And we've asked them to put up proof, and they've refused to do so. And the net result is that crucial forensic digital evidence was completely cast aside. And really, when we were doing this project and writing these stories, that was the breakthrough for us, was getting our hands on her laptop, because it took literally less than seconds to type in Tembisa into our search term bar, and up popped the report. a viable motive for Babita Deokaran's murder. And, you know, to be fair, the Hawks have failed her and her family. The arrest and conviction of 6 hitmen, which the Hawks had a very limited role in, that they were arrested by other policemen.
Yeah.
And the mastermind still breathes free air after all of this time. It's easy to draw the conclusion based on what we were able to find out that any impetus in this investigation seemed to stop after the 6 hitmen were taken into custody.
But why?
Well, I mean, how long is a piece of string? You know, in this matter, there are so many grave missteps made by law enforcement that it's little wonder that we have a murder detection rate of only 11% in South Africa, that only 1 in 10 murders are solved. So for every 10 people killed, you will have the grieving 9 families of people you have to say, well, we will never be able to give you justice. And unfortunately, as every day passes, that is becoming the sad reality for the Deokaran family, that they may never find out who the mastermind of this killing was.
I imagine that you find that quite a difficult thing to accept yourself. You set out, and you say it at the beginning of this book, to find out, and it's on the cover, why Babita Deokaran had to die. And I think you do answer that question, although I imagine the answer for you is not fulfilling.
No, absolutely. I mean, you know, when I first started this investigation, I'd sat with Rakesh Deokaran, and he and I had developed a friendship. And this was a man who was broken by grief, and also a man who wanted answers. And I made a promise then that I would follow the story to the end, regardless of what the risks may be, because Babita was someone who sacrificed her life for democracy and for the greater good, and her family deserved to know exactly who was the one who ordered her killing. Those 6 hitmen did not hire themselves.
In fact, when they were questioned, they referred to her only as the lady, or that lady. I don't think they knew, according to at least the descriptions that you give us, who she was, why a hit had been put out on her.
Absolutely. And what we see now is 4 years later, you know, the milestone again, we take stock. Where's the Hawks investigation? They will say it is open and it is still being investigated. And that's a convenient refrain because it prevents any further questions for fear of jeopardizing the investigation. But how many people are investigating this matter? Do they have teams of analysts? What resources are you, the Hawks, dedicating to this matter, which is, by all intents and purposes, high profile and has extreme ramifications for whistleblowing in South Africa? Any other prospective civil servant who feels impelled to do the right thing and report wrongdoing, what do they do in this situation? Because
it's
they look at
impossible.
Babita Deokaran's case and they say, well, she followed protocol, she died within 3 weeks, and then there was no investigation into her death, and whoever ordered it is still living large somewhere.
Yeah. You also talk about, and we're running out of time, Jeff, but this must have come at great risk to your own personal safety.
When we found that document, we understood that we would likely inherit the danger that she faced. If this document was what got her killed, then us putting it into the public domain would have the same effect. So we were aware about it, but it was too important a story to stay silent about and not to tell.
Jeff Wicks is the author of The Shadow State, Why Babita Deokaran Had to Die. It is a grueling read. Congratulations, Jeff. And I know that is even, it doesn't feel like the right thing to say, but you've done an incredible job of telling Babita Deokaran's story.